Welcome to Digitation Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Kelly Driscoll. In this episode, you'll hear part 2 of my conversation with Amy Urbanus, Assistant Professor in the Dietetics and Nutrition Program at University of Alaska Anchorage's School of Preventative and Therapeutic Services. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
When you were kind of speaking about for the students to have, between 20 and 30 competencies that they're working towards. I know when I was teaching was in an education program, and I think that maybe there were 15 to 20 at the time. And the language of them is not always crystal clear. No. And what an incredible, experience for the students to have that year where they are, as part of that kind of culminating experience, given the opportunity to work with you to, do that self-assessment. I think that that's huge. Giving them some time to, be really honest about where they feel like they may still have some gaps, to be able to use the ePortfolio as a reference for where they have been able to achieve various competencies and have a record of that with their reflections. And I'm imagining that there's times when you've been reviewing those with them where you've said, well, you're communicating to me that you feel like you have this gap, but when I'm looking at your ePortfolio and some of your reflections about this experience, it sounds to me like you've really achieved this. So what other opportunities might you need to have for, you to feel confidence that you have achieved that competency? And I'm imagining, for you to be able to work at that with them from the beginning and starting to kind of learn some of that language in the competencies and incorporate that into their own kind of thinking about what they're doing and why their different assignments and projects and site experiences have been created for them, that you're probably also finding times where you can see, as students going through this reflective process may not quite understand what the competency is all about, but you're able to kind of through this trajectory, guide them in that direction. So as students are kind of, at either point in the beginning or at the end, kind of going through this reflective process, have you identified times where, maybe a student discovered that there was something about their current path that may be revealing either where maybe they need to make a hard turn, or maybe it's solidifying something, but in a different realm. So for instance, you found your dream job working with people that had diabetes. And I'm imagining that some people coming into your program may be thinking that, they're pointed at, X. And as part of this experience, end up in different directions. How have you kind of seen that maybe reveal itself through some of these experiences and reflections that you have in the portfolios?
So, it's kind of interesting. I would say, I don't know if I've ever seen a student who is like completely pivoting, by the time they're finishing their undergraduate degree, mostly just because we as a department really try to foster this idea that the world of dietetics is very broad. Mm-hmm. And so, this is now, the next step in where you have to get a master's degree and, do supervised practice is really where you're going to be able to really decide, kind of what area you might be most interested in. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is that I think students forget like the work that they've done. Because, oh my gosh, if you're taking 15, and I forget too, if you're taking 15 credits and you're just like, I just have to get through biochemistry, right? Like this nutrition thing that I'm doing over here, it's fine. It's easy. Because I like it. I just have to pass biochemistry. So I think sometimes they forget about the things that they are, that they've been working on and doing. And so one of the things I do really like is, they pull out these projects or assignments or things and really are forced to think about, gosh, I think I did really enjoy this clinical case study, or, really as I'm playing with this portfolio and I'm uploading these education materials I developed using all of these fancy software programs that I don't know how to use. And they realize that they really like, and the part of the ePortfolio that speaks to them the most is the design and all of that, that there is a whole world of dietetics in education and materials and graphic design and a lot of things that they can really dive into and tap into their creativity. And so I think it kind of sometimes provides that opportunity to think about, because, when you look at a project that you might have worked on, it will bring up, maybe what was going on in your life at that time, or, what they were doing, and if they enjoyed it at all or not, whatever. And so I think it can provide, additional like thought about, what they might be interested in. Mm-hmm. Where I've seen the most pivoting, I also help co-teach a class called Health 151. I think you're familiar with it. It's called Breaking Trail on your health and social services career. And it's an interdisciplinary or interprofessional. I always say interdisciplinary because that's hospital speak. Education, we say interprofessional. So it's an interprofessional education type course. And it is also very much like an entry. I'm a new student in the College of Health. Yeah. And we use ePortfolio heavily, and they build an ePortfolio, but their students are really diving into different career paths, different things. And that's where I really do see pivots happening, and which is great. I mean, it's fantastic. I wish somebody had done that for me when I was, starting out, because you don't know what you want to do. You think, and a lot of students in the College of Health are in the nursing program, and then they start to learn about other healthcare professions and realize, oh, there's more than just nurse and doctor. I had mentioned a while ago in the beginning of this, of our discussion, I talked about how much I really like advising. So one of the things that I love about this class, and then the use of portfolio, where they really are, again, introduced to the idea of reflection, and in this class, we're not measuring their knowledge and their competence. We're asking them to think about where they fit, and what's going to, help them be most successful. And so it is really fun to read. I have had a couple students where I've read their reflections and their personal statements and things like that, and have reached out and said, hey, I'm super excited for you, and I'm super happy that you're on the path that you are. I sense some hesitation, have you thought about this program or this program? And just to kind of, make that connection, I think all faculty are looking to, I'd love to fill, my seats in my classes, but if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. And so it's really nice to use that tool to help pull some of those things out. Some students, especially in Alaska, we serve a large rural population. So we have, especially like in our online programs. And so that could be a really big, to be a freshman in college, trying to do some online education, living in a rural community in a village, where maybe a student doesn't know any, that's been their whole, that's their world. And they have professional aspirations. And a lot of times it comes from a gap and a need in their home community, and they have a desire to seek this education, but it can be extremely scary. The idea of hopping on Zoom and just talking like this, with somebody is not, super comforting. So in these reflections, I'm like, oh my goodness, you have so much to offer. And they, through their writing, are able to share all of these amazing experiences. And so it can really provide an opportunity to identify a student that you may want to connect with, that you just wouldn't otherwise see when they're, submitting their assignment by midnight on Sunday night of the same assignment that everybody else is doing. So, so in that regard, so for that class specifically, I think that's where I see more, kind of pivots or, changes that they're life-changing things that they're thinking about.
Yeah, and it is such a wonderful course, and the design of it to really be this time for discovery, right? And for so many of the many first generation college students, many, as you mentioned, coming from rural communities where exposure and access are so different than what many would envision as your typical college student. And I think what has also just been remarkable, from Digication's perspective and working with the university too, and you mentioned this a little bit, and these opportunities to use the ePortfolio to learn about their students, is there does just seem this incredible culture and comfort with storytelling. And that when the students are given this opportunity to talk about the experiences that they have had in their families, in their communities, tied to their kind of cultural backgrounds and histories and connections to the area, that it almost seems like many of the young people there, or people, even those that are older and now coming to school or coming back to school, there's this almost need and desire to have this space to share these stories. And that this technology kind of came to the institution at a time where, access to the internet, although it's not perfect everywhere, it's starting to become more accessible, and giving people this opportunity to suddenly be able to share things beyond the, close communities and individuals within their families in ways that they haven't been able to before. And, in our collaboration with the different programs there, and through our wonderful relationship working with Paul Wasco and being introduced to folks like you and so many of the faculty there, doing the hard work with the students, it has just been this incredibly inspiring experience to see all of the different ways that, that are uniquely University of Alaska very often, in ways that you're innovating the use of the platform. So, I think for those that are listening, ePortfolios have had a long history in being tied to accreditation and assessment for being able to gather data for accreditation. But the way that the institution has been able to, open up the opportunity for students to really use it as that space for much more personalized storytelling and connections to, the passion that's led them to pursuing, different interests and fields at the college, has just been huge. So
and I'll give it
say something.
No. I've been talking a lot. I will give a shout out to my colleague here too, Dr. Walsh. She teaches a community nutrition class, which is one of our capstone classes. It's a 400 level class, and she does does a project using ePortfolio. So it's not building a portfolio in the sense that we've been talking about, like, for accreditation or for those kinds of things. But she, it's a multi-step project. And one of the coolest things when she first started utilizing it was she actually gives students the option to provide in one piece of it, to provide written work, or to do verbal and and record themselves talking about stuff, and gives them the choice. And she said it's really been neat to see how some students really shine when they have the opportunity to provide that, the oral response versus, versus writing, and vice versa. So I think it can, again, I think once faculty and students get over the idea of it's another platform, it's something else, right? Like it's not, a part of Blackboard, or it's not a textbook. It's not, those kinds of things. And then I would just say too that, so this is my 6th year. I make tweaks and do different things, not huge, but, constantly kind of thinking about how to make it better, and so it's okay to start out having it kind of just be, what we would consider a more traditional portfolio. I'm going to put my work in here, and then somebody else can view it. And I think that that's perfectly fine too. I think there's purpose in that, and just having, kind of a single place that somebody can do that outside of, like I said, like a Google Drive. And so, I think that some faculty, I get the sense, might be intimidated by it because they do see these like high level, innovative ways of using portfolio. And it doesn't have to be, that necessarily.
Start with a single, I mean, I know that Paul does a lot of workshops around the kind of 6-word story.
Yes, we use that a lot. I love it.
It can be the creation space for a story. It can be the creation space for a single project or reflection on an experience. And that is a very different kind of approach than some of the, more longitudinal,
right,
program-wide kind of experience portfolios. And absolutely that, as faculty are learning about different ways and kind of options that they have, and flexibly using it in ways that really suit their own needs and purposes, and letting students kind of take the reins in those cases and kind of design it in ways that work best for them. As you mentioned, it could be the incorporation of video or audio, and sometimes students are just marrying images and text together in ways that really kind of become their own art form. I had the opportunity to have Jill from dance join me on one of these conversations, and she would often describe the portfolios as almost a dance in her cases. The students are really trying to create an experience with the platform. So there's lots of different ways that it can be kind of molded and evolve over time. I love that you spoke a little bit about how, as the years go by, that you're always kind of making refinements and iterating on things. And I think that that's, a very healthy part of the whole practice in teaching.
Right.
And that, with every group of students that comes in, every cohort also has its own kind of needs and aspirations. And, they always teach us something too. And from that, we, it informs us and kind of getting ready for the next group to come in. So it is something that I think, it's quite different from one's course shell in a learning management system, because you can so easily take something from a prior semester and make adjustments to it as needed, and then make it available to the next group of students that come in. That things don't have that kind of hard stop and end date and then disappear.
Well, and it's interesting. So I'm building a promotion portfolio right now, and which our university, I'm sure lots of universities do that same thing for promotion and tenure files. And so I am not I like clinical stuff. I'm not a super creative person. And so that part of it is a little harder for me. But I like things to look aesthetically nice and pleasing. Yeah. So it's like this, I'm like, it needs to look better, but I don't know how to do that. Anyway, so I just this morning was actually looking in old classes of my students. And there are always a couple students that I just always pop into my head because usually they're the ones that are doing amazing work in culinary nutrition, and they're just so in with their environment and the food and gardening and all these wonderful things.
We all
And
love
so
food sodas.
I know it's so wonderful.
I've seen those culinary art.
Yes. So I'm thinking of this. So I was like, oh, I should see what she used as a background, right? So I'm thinking of this student, and I'm like, her stuff was always so beautiful. Let me just see if I can spark my creative juices.
Yeah.
So I opened up her portfolio, and she's now a practicing registered dietitian. So she's finished a master's degree and all the rest of it. And I opened up her undergraduate didactic program and dietetics portfolio that I still have access to. And she had given me permission to utilize it to help, as like guidelines for other students. Yeah. And it's now like a full, like professional portfolio. I still see some pictures. I see some examples of projects that she was most proud of probably in her undergraduate work. Obviously, she's now grown. She has children, things have moved on. But it was really neat to see that she took what she developed and created in DN 492 and has built it into a professional portfolio, got rid of the stuff that she didn't need, and but has continued to utilize it. So I just saw that this morning, and that was pretty cool to see that it's not, some students, like I said, are never going to look at it again, and that's perfectly fine. But it's nice to know that some take it with them and, continue to build and grow with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we were creating the education, even from the very beginning, we really wanted it to be something where alumni could take it with them and continue to utilize it in whatever manner, they really felt like they needed to. Maybe they just wanted to keep it as a record of what they did during that time. And then others, really get in there and sometimes create multiple versions of things for different employment opportunities. Some, as you mentioned, come back and start filling it out with, professional practice experience that they have, with professional development kinds of experiences that they've had, different certifications that they may get over the years. And, at this stage, it might be something that they just return to every few years, but they've got all of that history now that they can refer to. Things can get moved around and reorganized. So, and it is very joyful for educators to also be able to look back at what their students have done and share it with other students the way that you're doing to get them inspired, right? About what that kind of finished product may look like during their time as a student, right? This is something that you can strive for. You may present it differently, but these are the kinds of quality of the reflections that we're looking for, and maybe, presentation kind of design ideas and things. I think that that's all modeling. And, the fact that you've kind of gone through the process of creating your own P&T portfolio. I know that, from those being very open and students be able to take the reins, that the P&T portfolios can be much more structured because they have a different utility. But that it does still, again, kind of give you the opportunity as a teacher to be able to familiarize yourself with different ways that the tools can be used, and think about how you want to present yourself to different audiences. And I've always been interested in how many at your institution do choose to share their P&T portfolios publicly, because it has become something that they use not only for the purpose of promotion and tenure within the institution, but something that they're really proud of, that they want to be able to share with external audiences as well.
Right. Well, and the one thing I always tell my students too, it's like, we all have that memory of trying to apply to jobs the first time when you have no work experience. Beyond, I worked to pay the bills while I was in school and that kind of stuff. And how do you compete against, applicants that might have that? And so to me, that's something else as well. I always try to tell students that you really can utilize, portions of or all of or whatever. You can utilize portfolio in providing, and sharing your depth and breadth of experience, even though in a resume, it may not jump out at at somebody who's looking to hire somebody. In a resume, it may not jump out as you look at their work experience, you're like, oh, okay, well, you're pretty green, it's there's not a whole lot. But in an ePortfolio, they might have done some amazing project that gives them an example of what they're capable of, and how they might fit within their organization. So
much information about cultural fit.
Yeah. And that piece of it. So, again, maybe one student does that. I don't, there's really not a whole lot, we try to track students, and their careers and things, even just for our program. But, I'm hopeful that some students, are able to utilize a little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, as kind of the time goes by, that those that are doing the hiring, even if a job description said, oh, one of the requirements is 3 to 5 years experience, that, that students should have some confidence in the experiences that they have had as students, these field experiences. And even if they're creating their own kind of fictitious case studies, an example, but when they're able to show that, even if they just graduated a few months ago, when they can show that they've done the work, and now, there may be things that they need to be taught in the field, but those things can be taught when people that are hiring can see, okay, they've done this.
They've done this. Yeah.
Yeah. We can see that they've got, a mindset or work ethic, or, the profile of this person is really fitting the kinds of things that we're looking for, that very often, even if the job description may have been listing, X years of experience, that the people that are really making the final decisions.
Yeah. And especially as we move into so many professions requiring a graduate degree, their experiences are above and beyond when I was entering the workforce, with a bachelor's degree. So, so it's nice to be able to showcase that a little bit.
Yes, indeed. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. It was fun
to chat with you again. And I can't wait to share this conversation with our listeners. Your experience and perspective is so valuable. So thank you for sharing your story with me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It was super fun.
Good. Bye.
Bye.
Coming up next, we'll be chatting with Cheryl Toscano, professor at the School of Nursing at University of Alaska Anchorage. Here's a quick preview.
The important part is that they're, when they're having clinical experiences or patient experiences, not just as a student, but once they graduate, that they're reflecting on those and bringing what they learned from those experiences into the next encounter. We're hoping that will help the longevity of the nurse. And I don't like the word resilience, because I feel like sometimes saying someone's resilient is sort of rewarding a broken system. And so I would like a scenario where nurses are thriving because they're supported